Outside 79th and Vincennes, streets are closed. We have reports that firefighters have extinguished a blaze at a convenience store there with residences above it. On 53 in Joliet, there's closure. This is south of I-80 due to the flooding and pavement damage. The ramp from I-80 to southbound 53 or Chicago Street is closed. About Kennedy, delay Fullerton to Armitage with a crash in the right express lane. I'm Jim Talamonte.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. In our 1-hour heating and air conditioning weather center, here's our meteorologist, Steve Williams.
A lakeshore flood advisory in effect today. It'll be a windy day, mostly cloudy, shower or two, high 62. Cloudy tonight, low 53. A nice breeze tomorrow morning, otherwise a cloudy day, the high tomorrow, 66. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
53 at O'Hare. Next news, 7:30. Breaking news as it happens. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Attorney General Barr at a presser he had yesterday explaining the link between the Pensacola shooter and Al-Qaeda took questions and took some time out to make comments on the scope of the Durham investigation and what he will and will not allow the Department of Justice to become under his leadership. It will not become both the DOJ and FBI, it will not become or be allowed to continue being what it was under the previous president.
Attorney General, the criminal justice system will not be used for partisan political ends. And this is especially true for the upcoming elections in November. We live in a very divided country right now, and I think that it is critical that we have an election where the American people are allowed to make a decision, a choice between President Trump and Vice President Biden based on a robust debate of policy issues. And we cannot allow this process to be hijacked by efforts to drum up criminal investigations of either candidate. And I'm committed that this election will be conducted without this kind of interference. Any effort to pursue an investigation of either candidate has to be approved by me. Now, what happened to the president, and I've said this many times, what happened to the president in the 2016 election and throughout the first 2 years of his administration was abhorrent. It was a grave injustice, and it was unprecedented in American history. The law enforcement and intelligence apparatus of this country were involved in advancing a false and utterly baseless Russian collusion narrative against the president. The proper investigative and prosecutive standards of the Department of Justice were abused, in my view, in order to reach a particular result. We saw two different standards of justice emerge, one that applied to President Trump and his associates, and the other that applied to everybody else. We can't allow this ever to happen again.
And so it ends here, is what Barr is saying, that I understand what happened full well, but we're not going to make this the new normal when it comes to the Department of Justice.
But this cannot be, and it will not be, a tit-for-tat exercise. We are not going to lower the standards just to achieve a result. The only way to stop this vicious cycle, the only way to break away from a dual system of justice is to make sure that we scrupulously apply the single and proper standard of justice for everybody.
And so he also mentioned that he has some sense, general sense of the Durham investigation. Of course he does. And he wanted to single out where he thinks this may not be going, just so everyone's clear.
Now, as to President Obama and Vice President Biden, whatever their level of involvement, based on the information I have today, I don't expect Mr. Durham's work will lead to a criminal investigation of either man. Our concern over potential criminality is focused on others.
And he made the point, which has been made before, that abuse of power, even egregious abuses of power, do not necessarily trigger a violation of federal statutes. The abuse of power is not necessarily synonymous with federal crime, something that, of course, House and Senate Democrats didn't understand when we were talking about the impeachment of President Trump for high crimes and misdemeanors. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Adam Mill, who's an attorney specializing in labor, employment, and public administration law. He's a contributor to The Federalist, amgreatness.com, and The Daily Caller. Adam, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Dan and Amy. How are things in the People's Republic of Illinois?
Yeah, tell us about it. We'll let you know when we get today's edict from President J.B. Jinping. Here's you heard from Attorney General Barr. Did he strike the right chords in your estimation with respect to the Durham investigation?
Well, I feel like I'm listening to the words I've been writing for the last 2 years. I'm wondering if Attorney General Barr might actually be a reader of mine. Yes, this is a huge problem with the perception of the Department of Justice, which right now seems kind of ironically named like the Ministry of Information or the Ministry of Peace, like from the 1984 novel. We just had yet another DOJ OIG report come out just a few days ago, in which an assistant U.S. attorney didn't pay her taxes for 3 years. They didn't file a return for 3 years, and prosecution was declined. And this is on top of another supervisory FBI analyst was caught with child porn on his devices. Prosecution declined. We've had instances where DOJ people have been caught shoplifting, hundreds of dollars. Prosecution declined. Taking bribes, conflicts of interest. It doesn't seem to matter. The Department of Justice employees, if you work for the Department of Justice, you're inside the velvet rope, and there's a good chance you might lose your job, but you're going to be allowed to resign in anonymity. This guy, Kevin Kleinsmith, was allowed to resign before the OIG report came out. He falsified evidence for the FISA court. So those are great words coming out from Attorney General Barr. They're the right words, but he's got a long way to go to change that culture.
That's a long laundry list of crimes. Anybody in there for armed robbery? I mean, my gosh, child porn, and they didn't prosecute him? That's a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big deal, and the taxes thing is a big deal too. And you've got McCabe too. McCabe's an indispensable witness in the Flynn case, and he's the guy who, if the Flynn case had ever gone to trial, he would have said, "I put Flynn on notice that those two agents I was sending over to investigate Flynn we're there for official FBI business." But in order to believe Flynn, you have to ignore the fact that he has lied 4 times to an internal Inspector General report or Inspector General investigation involving a leak of sensitive investigative material right around the election time. He was clearly meddling in the election. He's leaking information about the investigation into Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation. He lied twice under oath, twice not under oath, and prosecution was declined. And he's, of course, a millionaire, and he's a contributor on these major news shows, so he's doing just fine. Comey lied to the FISA court. He said that there was the only way to get the information to surveil Carter Page was by going through this all electronic surveillance. But of course, Carter Page offered to sit for an FBI interview anywhere, anytime, a month before the Comey certified that they needed to spy on Carter Page. Carter Page knew he was being investigated by the FBI, and he wanted to clear things up, and Comey just ignored that. He certified the FISA court under oath that this was the only way to do this. So, I mean, like I said, Barr has a long way to go to get rid of this dual system of justice in which, people inside the velvet rope, the elite, DOJ, Department of Justice, get treated differently than the rest of us.
The Department of Justice, yeah. With respect to a crime we know was committed, this apparently has escaped the recollections of the Beltway press corps, thus the need for Stephen Portnoy from CBS News to have this back and forth with Kayleigh McEnany on Friday, suggesting he was befuddled by the suggestion that crimes had been committed. What are the specific crimes that have been committed? Well, as Mark Thiessen notes in the Washington Post, you've noted as well, a crime was committed when the classified information was leaked to David Ignatius at the Washington Post. We know that for starters. And so who would Barr be looking at when all of these senior level people are being absolved for previous apparent misrepresentations to crimes like you just mentioned, from Comey to McCabe, and then the absolution that Barr just effectively gave, going above even those individuals?
Well, I mean, we don't know who leaked that. And what you're talking about here is that after Trump was elected, after the election in November, he sent his people out, Michael Flynn included, to reach out to start with the transition. That's a constitutional process, a peaceful transfer of power. We've had a successful peaceful transfer of power, for over 200 years, all the way up until 2016, when it was interfered with by the FBI and the DOJ. Exactly what Barr said. And so there was a phone call between Kislyak and Flynn. That's a very sensitive diplomatic phone call between a member of the incoming administration and a foreign power. It was listened to. It was audio taped by one of the three-letter agencies, maybe the NSA, maybe the FBI. We don't know. And that transcript was leaked in January of 2017. Now, the interesting thing is that the original article said that Flynn did nothing wrong, that there was this contact and the FBI determined there was nothing wrong with the contact. And that was done to lure Flynn into a sense of security, to make him think that he was not being investigated, so that when he interviewed these FBI agents a day or two later, it came across as, we're just tying up a few loose ends, clear a few things up. It's not really an investigation. Which, of course, it wasn't an investigation. It was really just an effort to get Flynn talking until he contradicted this secret wiretap, which, by the way, Flynn has never been given the opportunity to review this transcript of the call between Kislyak and himself, and was required to plead guilty on faith that his interview with Strzok and the other FBI agent contradicted what was in the transcript. It's one of the many outrages of the case.
Yeah, it was a perjury trap. So when is, do you think Flynn, when is he ever going to be exonerated?
Well, it should have already happened because Attorney General Barr exercised his discretion, his constitutional discretion, to withhold prosecution from the case. He determined that the interests of justice were served by dismissing the Flynn case. It was a totally appropriate action. He should not have waited on the judge to dismiss the case. He should have stepped in. It should have happened over a year ago when many of this misconduct was becoming apparent. When will Flynn get clear of all this? Well, what's standing in the way right now is that the judge overseeing the case read an op-ed in, I believe it was the Washington Post, and he was so moved by the op-ed that opposed Flynn going free that the judge actually appointed the op-ed author. This is hard to believe, but it's true.
Retired judge.
He appointed right, who is also a retired judge. He appointed this op-ed author to help the judge do two things. The first one was oppose the dismissal of Flynn from the case, which is bizarre and unconstitutional, and Margot Cleveland of the Federalist wrote a nice article on that. And then today I have an article addressing the other thing that he's asking this amicus to do, which is investigate Flynn for perjury. Now, that's just bizarre. Why would you investigate somebody for perjury who's, the case is about to get dismissed. Well, what he's saying is Flynn perjured himself by pleading guilty. Now, think about this. This is like in the old days when the Soviets would shoot a political prisoner, they would send the family a bill for the bullet. And that's kind of what's happened here. Flynn is a victim of some gross prosecutorial misconduct. And rather than charging the person who's responsible for that misconduct, who's a guy named Brandon Van Grack, he was alumni from the Mueller team, and investigating that guy, the victim is being accused of perjury for submitting to this railroading prosecution and pleading guilty. It's just bizarre. And to hire this guy who's already spoken out on the case in the pages of the Washington Post to assist this judge, it's like inviting a fan out of the stands to help ref a game in the middle of the game. It's completely unfair to really both sides.
It is remarkable because this is an effort by Judge Emmett Sullivan to it seems to muddy the waters, unless he does seem to have sort of a personal animus with the Department of Justice, because he also was difficult during the Eric Holder era as well in terms of doing things that were counterintuitive and counter precedent, frankly. Now you have the flip side of that. 12 state attorneys general led by Ohio AG Dave Yost have now filed an amicus brief in support of DOJ's motion to dismiss without commentary the Flynn charges. They write, because such punditry disrobes the judiciary of its cloak of impartiality. And the Wall Street Journal's opined upon this as well, noting that the precedent in his own circuit by the chief judge of his, in an opinion written by the chief judge of his circuit, D.C., which was an Obama appointee on a case U.S. v. Fokker Services, is being ignored by Emmett Sullivan in terms of the discretion prosecutors have, as well as defense attorneys have. That he is just interceding in a place that he has no business. That's the holding of the court in that case. There's also a Supreme Court case that is close to point on this.
Oh, really smart points. And I personally think, if I'm going to make a prediction here, that somebody within the judicial branch is going to step in and pull back Judge Sullivan, because this has a potential of really embarrassing the judicial branch, because he's really stepping outside of his role. And the idea that we would prosecute people with perjury for pleading guilty and then later on deciding they're going to withdraw the plea because of apparent prosecutorial misconduct, that is third world country stuff. That's not the kind of thing that happens in a constitutional democracy. So I suspect that this will not go too much farther before you get somebody from the Supreme Court stepping in or whispering in the ear of the chief judge of to tell Emmett Sullivan, you need to step off the case. We're going to get a new judge. We're going to accept the motion to dismiss and move on. It's
interesting you say that, because about this being third world stuff, because Matt Taibbi, man of the left, said the same thing in a piece he wrote about how Democrats have abandoned civil liberties. Sullivan's decision was the kind of thing one would expect from a judge in Belarus. Yeah, that's how far afield it is.
Or Venezuela, yeah.
Adam Mill, he is an attorney specializing in labor and employment and public administration law, contributor to thefederalist.com, amgreatness.com, and the Daily Caller. Adam, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
This is attorney Stephen Leahy. This isn't the first crisis we faced together. Back in 2008, business professionals in trouble sought help from bankruptcy attorneys, loan modification attorneys, foreclosure defense attorneys, and IRS attorneys trying to gain full financial recovery. They should have just called me. Let me tell you about Chuck. His small business crashed in the 2008 crisis. He faced 2 foreclosures, overbearing creditors, and the dreaded IRS